Hey guys, what's going on? Back with another Cold War Zombies video. And I don't usually do this type of video, which I guess is technically what you would consider a theory video, because it's not necessarily a solve. I mean, it has to do with a new solve that I recently solved, but then it's kind of looking forward and a theory into the end of Cold War. Maybe the end of the storyline for Cold War, beginning of maybe Black Ops 6 zombie storyline. And so what I'm talking about, and I'm gonna kind of piece it together a little bit strange, just to kind of give you guys a little bit of a backstory. So at the end of Black Ops 4 Zombies Tagged Your Toten, the Ether story, the end, the cutscene, the final cutscene, we don't necessarily see Nikolai get shot. It's implied that Samantha shoots him in the back of the head with a gun, and that ends the entire Ultimis and Primis storyline. So, but the big thing to take away from that is in any movie, if you're a big movie fan or even books and authors, sometimes you're misled or kind of like the whole red herring angle of a story, but so you're kind of misled to believe that Nikolai gets shot in the back of the head. Even in the Cold War, the intro cutscene for Die Machine, Samantha says she got uh, a tape from an old friend, an old Russian friend that's pretty much a late dead Russian friend. So at that point, we're still under the impression that Primus and Ultimus are dead. Nikolai was shot by Samantha, so the entire crew in the story is over. Samantha and Eddie go into the new storyline, and everything else gets banished to the Dark Ether. So that's what's implied. But in a lot of good stories and what authors would do, and directors in movies and maybe even TV shows, is the hero always comes back at the end to save the day. So don't think of Black Ops 4 as its own storyline. Think of the bigger picture starting at maybe World at War, maybe going forward. Maybe like anything, a director or author changes their mind, and I guess that's technically called retconned if I'm using the right term, where something that maybe was or wasn't canon now becomes canon. So, like again, think of the bigger picture where maybe at the time Blundell, Treyarch, and Craig Houston, maybe they thought, hey, it was a good idea to end the Ether story, but then you go back and retcon the idea that Ultimus and Primus are really dead. So this is going to kind of give an idea, like again, I said like a story or maybe what if type thing. And I don't usually do this because I know Twitter and YouTube are filled with trolls. Everybody wants to get their story and idea out there. But for me, I tell people I don't make any money off of this. I make maybe $1 or something like that from ad revenue. But anyways, so what the idea would be is, let's say we get at the end of Cold War and Samantha's in trouble, and maybe she kind of the same thing, maybe almost like Victus, how Victus was always on ice until Richtofen and Primus and Ultimus needed a Victus to help them out to kind of like build a Garthin device even in transit. Now let's say the tables are turned where Samantha's in trouble, and Samantha now brings forward, let's say, or it's revealed that Primus and Ultimus aren't dead, they're just put on ice, so to speak, until Samantha really needs them. Maybe she gets into trouble, maybe the operators get into trouble, and we're at a point in the story, maybe cliffhanger going into Black Ops 6, that Samantha needs help and or she's about to die. Maybe like Primus and Ultimus show up at the end, going into the new Black Ops 6 story, something along the lines of that. This is all kind of like a fan theory or kind of what if, because what it has to do with a solve that I recently solved, which is amazing. So it has to do, I'm just going to briefly skim over it just in case you're not familiar with it, is Black Ops 3 and pretty much Jason's bracket has to do with the story of Faust, Mephistopheles, of course I'm going to butcher that name, and and the story about how cats have 9 lives, and it mimics or parallels the book slash Broadway play Cats, where when a cat gets old, he goes to a godlike cat asking to be reborn into a younger version of themselves, a better life for themselves. Maybe in their original life, they were poor, homeless, or just kind of, and it has to do with the nine deadly sins, I believe, also, but I'm not going to touch into too much of that stuff. Just the premise, funny enough, just the premise of getting reborn into a better life. Maybe you were bad and then you became more religious and then you want to be reborn into a better life, and you did the right thing to have the godlike cat or Monty, reborn you into a newer, better version of yourself. Maybe you repented, I guess, if I am using those terms the correct way. So it has to do again with Nero being based off Mr. Mephistopheles. I know that's probably why. Funny enough, that's probably why they shorten the name to Mr. Misto or Mesto, Mephisto, I think sometimes, because I know it's a difficult name. But Nero being based off the fictional cat character, which was actually from a book, in the story of Cats, he is able to bring stuff back to life. And one of the famous lines from Kevin Sherwood's Alone song is, "They buried a well where the seven fell." So going back again to Primis and Ultimis, somebody believe, again, maybe what's his name? Nikolai, maybe he didn't die. Some people are thinking maybe Richtofen didn't really die. Maybe the zombie version of himself was not the real Richtofen. So whoever the missing person is that's not dead, let's say there's seven of them, I believe it's probably Nikolai. More stuff that people probably don't know about Nikolai is basically Mistopheles himself in IW Zombies, and I know for one that Jason writes a good story, and Treyarch writes a good story, so there's probably a lot of mixing and blending of stories and stuff like that. My idea would be Nikolai. Some people's idea I've seen think that it's Richtofen. So flash forward or transition now to Cats, and one of the lines where it talks about the cat, Mr. Mistopheles, that at the bottom um, it says, and not actually literally the last line at the bottom. It says, and it's sung by one of the other cats that's kind of narrating the story. It says, and not long ago, this phenomenal cat produced seven cats right out of a hat. Now, being that Kevin and Brian, and I forget who the person that wrote the lyrics, being that they're very familiar with the zombie storyline, and Kevin said it himself in a couple of YouTube videos, is they give him the backstory of where they're going with it, and then he writes the song about it. So it wouldn't surprise me, even though I'm not a clickbaiter, so I'm classifying this as a theory. Is what if now Nero comes back to let me just backtrack. Okay, so let's say Nero now goes back to the woods, or maybe Nikolai isn't dead, maybe something happens, and Nikolai now calls on Nero, or maybe Nero, um, because Richtofen does show up at the end cutscene for Shadows of Evil. Maybe he became friends with Nero. Maybe they had a backup plan that, hey, if he ends up dying on his mission, go to this location and bring him back to life. Or I'm sure Richtofen, being as clever as he is, probably had a backup plan, kind of like Victus, or insurance policies, as they said. So what if Nikolai, maybe Richtofen had a backup plan, or one of the two, that to call on Nero, or Nero's supposed to help them if anything should happen. And in the actual Broadway play, he actually does a ritual, and they show the ritual I know there's a typo in the subtitles, but it says the phenomenal cat produced 7 cats. So he has the capability of Nero and Mr. Mistopheles. They do have the capability of bringing humans back to life. And in one of the rituals, and the red tarp, let's call it, or blanket, symbolizes blood, and he does a ritual where one of the cats sacrifices himself. So Nero, in turn, would need to sacrifice maybe 7 people or something along the lines to bring back Primus and Ultimus. So the idea would be going into maybe Black Ops 6, maybe the end of Black Ops Cold War, that Nero somehow maybe shows up in the frozen forest, which I guess um, is Agartha itself somehow. So maybe Nero dies and he ends up showing up in the frozen forest and somehow can bring back them to life. I'm sure Richtofen and him have some backup plan going. So that would be the idea of, like I said, where authors, writers, directors, maybe even producers and stuff like that. Sometimes the hero, I know not in every story, but sometimes the hero dies in the beginning, or even the villain. Like you think the villain is dead in the beginning, and then he ends up coming back at the end of the story, movie, or series to save the day. So what if Nero um, gets called upon again by Richtofen or Nikolai or even Samantha um, to save Primus and Ultimus or bring them back to life? Now, I know financial reasons. I don't think Treyarch would hire Jeff Goldblum back to do that. Maybe they'll do it in a comic, a cutscene, a cipher, maybe some intel. But what if in when we get to DLC 4 or 5 or whatever, that now we get intel of Nero maybe coming to the frozen forest, or maybe Samantha talking about maybe meeting a magician in the forest, where the 7 of them died, and then he brings them back to life, like in the actual book slash play slash movie itself, where Nero the cat, let's call him Nero the cat, can bring uh, people back to life, and in this case, he brought the 7 cats back to life. Again, this is probably something that's not going to show up for a while. Just kind of a thought. It could be, again, same thing like Victus and Transit, put on ice until maybe Treyarch or the crew needs them. So, like I said, it'd be a cool way to parallel what Richtofen did, how Samantha maybe stole his idea that, hey, let me put Primus on Ultimus on ice. They're really alive, hiding somewhere, but maybe she doesn't want Monty to see them, or whoever the bad guy is in Dark Ether, to know that they're alive. Maybe he'll go and try and kill them and stuff like that. But what if Samantha really knows that Primus and Ultimus didn't die in Tag to Toe, and that maybe they're hiding somewhere? Maybe, like, again, Nero brought them back to life. Maybe Nero was summoned to the frozen forest and was able to bring them back to life. Um, and she's just hiding them. Or same thing, Treyarch, and it's cool because it does. I always say, like, Treyarch does stuff very cleverly, and there's so many different layers of stories. So what if now it parallels what Eddie did in a way? I know people might not be happy because it's technically that retelling the same story that people like to troll about, but how cool would it be? And that's what authors and writers do, is what if now she has Primus and Ultimus on ice to save the day, or one of the two, maybe Primus, to save the day when she needs help at the end. Anyways, that's pretty much it. I'll see you guys later.